Hello, everyone. I'm Tammy Miller. I'm from Community and Cultural Outreach, and I'm happy to be facilitating today for Lindi. And Lindi, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. She's a good friend to me and to CCO, Lindi Conover.
Thank you so much, Tammy. I am so glad to be here today, and just want to thank everybody for being here as well. This is, we're all doing this virtually still, which is great. I'm glad that we're able to do this, but I do hope that throughout this presentation, if we have any little technical difficulties, I'm sure that you will be very gracious and understanding as we work through those, if they should arise. So as Tammy said, I'm Lindi Conover, and I work a lot with CCO doing different things. So it's exciting to see everybody here. I am the founder of the Nonprofit Growth Academy, and I am your friendly neighborhood grant writer. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about grant writing. The reason that I do what I do is because I believe in the collective impact that people have to impact their corner of the world. So my job is to work with and teach leaders of people-powered nonprofit organizations how to get more grant dollars in the door so that they can grow their organizations and make a bigger impact in their corner of the world. That is the thing that lights me on fire and makes me really excited. And so I'm here today to teach you, to share with you everything that I know about this world. And well, it would maybe take a little bit longer than an hour to do everything I know, but to at least get you prepared to feel very confident the next time that you go apply for a grant. So what I'm hoping to do, there we go. All right, so here's what I hope we can get through today. I want you to understand what it is that makes a strong grant application. So we're going to do that by sort of demystifying the grant process. So, if any of you have been in my sessions before, when we do these in person, I like to make them very interactive. I try to have folks sit with the people in their organization so that they can actually work through and workshop some of these things. I can't do it quite that way today, but I do hope that as we go through this, you list some questions in the chat, and I can't see that right now, but I'm sure that Tammy will alert me if there's something that we need to address right away, and if not, hopefully we can at least get to it at the end of the presentation. So again, my purpose today is to sort of demystify this grant process for you, help you get more confidence in applying for your first grant or your next grant, getting your organization grant ready, which will kind of help you understand how it is that you might go about identifying specific grant opportunities for a project or program that you're trying to do. And then we're going to spend really the bulk of our hour together going over how you would prepare a successful grant application. So we're going to talk about things like your project description, your budget, timeline, needs, measurable outcomes, and things like that. I've revamped this because this is, I think, maybe the 4th or 5th year that I've done a presentation like this, and maybe worked with some of you with the technical assistance trainings on those Saturday programs before. So I wanted to give you something a little bit different if this is, not your first time hanging out with me and learning about grants. I want to give you something a little bit different. So that's why I wanted to talk about sort of like what goes on in the background of the grant process. So part of this year that I can share with you comes from a project that I was involved in last year, where I reviewed hundreds of grant applications for small organizations across the United States that were trying to get funds they were COVID related funds that had come out for community organizations that were serving through projects and programs related to the humanities. And while I had spent, I had lots of experience in doing grant reviews and other fields, this was a great opportunity for me to sort of see it from consistently from the other side. So while I write grants and I teach leaders how to write grants and prepare their organizations to be grant ready, this was a really intensive way to look at what it is that funders are really looking for. And so I wanted to be able to share that experience with you today, and really, again, demystify that process. So the first thing to understand here is about the different funders. So there's lots of different funders out there. And that's probably one of the first things that you need to think about when you're applying for grants is what kind of funding am I going after? And this is important for a couple of reasons. For one, when you're a small organization and maybe you don't have a huge track record of financial responsibility, and things like, you haven't served thousands of people or maybe even hundreds of folks yet, you're not going to want to go right out of the gate into some sort of multi-million-dollar or even hundreds of thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of dollars from the federal government. That is going to be a waste of your time. I'm not going to encourage you to do that, because you're not going to get it. And that's not me being a naysayer. If you know me, you know that I'm definitely an optimist, and I know that we can get you there, but we just have to take it, one step at a time. So there's different types of funding that would be appropriate for different types of projects. So here I've got a couple lists. So we have like our public types of funding. These would be things that might be available through your city or your town or maybe your county. They are, usually the revenue, the funding source is tax dollars. They're dollars that are set up, through public funding sources. So again, we might have something at the local level. Like I said, your state, your city, your town, your county, something like that. Then there's also sort of state dollars. Now, this can kind of be a bit of a gray area because there are some agencies like, for example, the Oklahoma Arts Council or the Indiana Humanities Council, that those are sort of their state, and they might also have some, they're state funded, but they might also have some private dollars in there as well. But those come, sort of, there's some situations in which federal funding comes to the state, and then the state has a department that is responsible for getting those dollars out to the communities that are in need. And then of course we have our big, our big enchiladas out there, the federal government. That's where you would see opportunities on what you may be familiar with, like grants.gov. Again, at least in terms of the community organizations that are associated with CCO, that's probably not going to be where you're going to start. Now, you may be, as an individual, working with an agency that is, has a huge track record and a giant budget every year, and that would be appropriate. But for, the small community type community-oriented grants, you're generally not going to be looking at a grants.gov, especially not for your first application. What you will be looking at more would be the private foundations and maybe what's called these donor-advised funds, or DAFs, DAFs, donor-advised funds for short. And private foundations can vary greatly between the size of the organization and the size of the grants that they award. But they usually have it's a small group of people. Well, I don't want to say they're always a small group of people, but they can be a small group of people, maybe with one staff member or no staff members, or just a handful of folks that are doing the frontline work of that foundation. And they typically, private foundations are set up by a family or an individual who has some sort of mission in their heart that they really want to put out there in the world, and they want to do it philanthropically by leaving a trust or some sort of estate. Now, those are kind of what I'm talking about. There might be sort of your smaller ones. Of course, you have something as big as like the Ford Foundation or the Gates Foundation or the Rockefellers. Those are huge private foundations. But then we have smaller ones, like your local community foundations that are giving out $2,500 grants, $10,000 grants for very localized, specific types of projects. We also have this is sort of I don't want to say it's brand new because it's it's not brand new, but it's relatively new compared to some of these other sources of funding. These are these donor advised funds. Now, this is kind of, I don't want to say quite like the wild, wild west, but because it is new, there's some, there's a lot of like man behind the curtain happening with donor advised funds. So let me just explain for a second what these are. Let's say my family wanted to, we had a chunk of money that we wanted to establish some sort of philanthropic program through. And let's say we wanted to support music in public schools in my home county, Madison County, Indiana. Now, let's say this, chunk of money is $250,000. We don't have that, but let's just pretend for a minute that we did. So we would say we have this $250,000. We really want to give it philanthropically to set up some sort of establishment that can fund that, rather than us having to go set up a whole foundation, file our own paperwork every single year, go through the process of accepting applications, all that onerous work that goes into putting grant dollars out into the world. We might set up what's called a donor advised fund. And so we would get with an organization, an establishment, a foundation that deals with DAFs. And we would say, hey, here's our $250,000. We want you to kind of handle it all. And we just want it to support music programs in public schools in central Indiana. And then the organization through which we have established the DAF would kind of do our dirty work, would do all the work for us. A lot of times what is frustrating as someone who does grant research and is trying to get those dollars for small organizations is that the donor advised funds are very sort of, they're secretive in the sense that they don't accept unsolicited applications a lot. And so the donor might have to, the establishment, the DAF would have to go out and actually sort of find the organizations that they want to fund. So we would maybe approach Lapel High School. They would never be able to apply to us, but we would say, hey, we want to give you guys $10,000 this year to buy, new sound equipment for your stage or whatever it is that we wanted to do. And so it can be a little frustrating as someone seeking grant funding to interface with DAFs because there's a lot of stuff that goes on that you just really can't access. Now, the reason they do that, it makes perfect sense, is because they don't want to get a ton of unsolicited applications. I don't want, applications coming from all over the country for my my little fund that was only intended to help rural, East Central Indiana or Madison County. So that's what those are. You may see those when you're out doing grant research, this donor advised fund. I know it can be very frustrating, but I just, I don't want to spend too much time talking about DAFs, but where you're probably going to be looking, if you're looking for grants to fund your small programs now, would be private foundations and community foundations, especially because they are very localized in their approach. And a lot of times there may be a DAF, a donor advised fund, set up with a community foundation that is specifically intended to support small organizations that are maybe trying to do capacity building or, grow in that community. But the thing I want to, whether it's a local, a state, federal, a private foundation, or a DAF, it really is, the important thing to remember here is that it is the funder's priorities that determine what it is that they fund. So at these sort of more public arenas, these public funders, that's probably going to be laid out in some sort of a policy. And that's just, this is what they fund because this is what, the commissioners have said we fund, or this is what the counselors say we fund, or, the federal government, it is statutory. So they have limited ability for what they can fund. But the same thing goes for private foundations and donor advised funds, because funders, the people who put the dollars out there, the philanthropic dollars into the world, they're people too. Funders are people too. So they have things that make, that are very important to them and to their hearts. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if you're in some of the other sessions at conference, like Ian Adair, he talks about how to get donor attention. That's really important That's an important element of this because, again, funders are the ones who determine how their money is going to get spent. So if you're doing a really good job explaining how you're impacting your community, how you're benefiting your community, you're gonna get that attention so that you have an opportunity to get more funding. So that's a little bit about, like, what goes on behind the curtain. I want to just kind of touch on this too, and let you know that there's not usually when there's a grant application deadline and you submit your documents, there's real people on the other side who have to read through that stuff. They are probably receiving dozens or hundreds of other applications that are being, they're being weeded through, and it's a very tiring and onerous process. And so I say that because it's important to always follow the rules of the grant guidelines and make sure that you're actually giving the funder the information that they ask for. And there's a very good reason that they're asking for it, because there are certain priorities that they have to meet based on those funders' guidelines. And so it's really important to remember that there's a human on the other side of this, or a set of humans, a panel of 2 to 5 other people who are actually going to be going through your documents, making sure that everything's correct the way that they've asked for it to be, and that you will be able to stand out among the many applicants. And I say that because I want to encourage you. Like I said, I last year about this time I went through hundreds of applications for that were anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 requests. And there were, out of those hundreds of applications, there were a handful that really, really stood out as like excellent. And so you always want to just be striving for that excellence, and I know you can do it. So that's what we're going to talk about the rest of today, is just what it is that actually makes a good application. And all right. I'm trying to, okay, move this forward. So here we are in the application process. Like I just spoke about, there's going to be an application process for every different application out there. A lot of times folks will come to me and they'll say, what do I need to, write a grant? And I will always say it depends on the funder, depends on what their priorities are, and it depends on what their application looks like. At this point in our world, most foundations, most places that you're going to be able to access grant funds have a website. And that website is going to have everything that you should know, including the deadlines, what the priorities are, how to make a submission, and contact information should you need help or want to reach out to someone and just sort of talk through your project idea or whatever your big idea is. So I always encourage you, to start there. Look at the website. It is absolutely imperative that the first thing that you do is find the application guidelines that explains this is what you need, this is how you prepare the application. At this point, also, most applications are all being submitted online. It makes life a lot easier. However, with that, I just want to make a note that when you're sitting down to write your application, do not wait till the last minute, because sometimes you may find that getting your online portal set up so you can actually submit it online is going to take a couple of days. Recently, there was I set up a new account for a client that I was working with, and it took 10 days to get the application, just get the organization set up in the system so that we could submit our application. That there's nothing, we did it because we started early and we knew what that took. And sometimes it also takes, you don't know until you get in there what it is that you're going to need to set it up. So I say that as a point of caution, to just make sure you give yourself plenty of time and get in there and really know what it is that you're going to have to set up. They might be looking for things like an IRS determination letter, your bylaws, articles of incorporation, letters signed by the president that say, yes, I am in fact the president of this organization, or whatever. I don't, it depends. It's very dependent on the specific funder, their application process, and what the portal requires. Just give yourself plenty of time and get familiar with what those things are before you start your application. Always just, again, want to point out that a lot of the times, like 99% of the time, the information that you're looking for can be found in the application guidelines. And if you still have questions, then I always suggest reaching out to the program officer. Or if you just want to say, how is it, I've got this great idea, it seems like it aligns, but I just want to know how we might be able to connect that and make our impact even bigger. Reaching out to a program officer and having that conversation is very helpful. And the role of the program officer in an organization is really to make sure that all of the documents, all of the application materials are as strong as they can be for when they do go to the review committee. So those folks can really be your best friend if you, start out on the right foot with them and say, listen, I just want to make sure I have the strongest application. That's what they want too. And then you guys can work together to troubleshoot any issues you have or ask them any questions. So what is it that makes a strong application? Getting your organization grant ready is really, really important. I think one of the things that's most frustrating about my field is that folks think that grant writing is all about writing, that if you're a good writer, that you can be a good grant writer. Now, certainly there are some skills to being able to coherently put a sentence together and cohesively put that sentence together with other sentences so that you can answer the question. So yes, writing is important, but writing is really the icing on this multi-layered cake of planning. And that's the part that I think grant writers, new grant writers, they put the emphasis on the grant writing, where so much of what you're actually doing in the lead up to putting the application together is grant planning. And so I just want to make that distinction because this is why it is so important to focus on getting your organization grant ready before you sit down to write the application. To sort of demonstrate this point, I want you to, for a second, think about your favorite movie. What's your favorite movie in the whole world? I want you to imagine in your mind for just a moment the opening scene of that movie. What's happening? Who's there? What's going on? Now think about sort of the climax of the movie later. What's happening then? And how does it end? Now imagine having to sit down and describe that, write it, type it up, answer all those questions that I just asked you. Now I want you to think about the opening scene to the movie Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? You're probably drawing a blank. If I had asked you to write about the opening scene to this esoteric movie, unless Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf happens to be a favorite movie, you're probably not going to be able to do that. So this is my point. The frustration here is that when you are unfamiliar with something, it can be really difficult to write about it. And I think that that's the frustration that many new grant writers face, is that they think it's the frustration happens when they sit down to write about it, but they really don't know how to answer the question because they haven't addressed those questions thoughtfully in the planning process ahead of time. But if you are very familiar with what it is that your organization is trying to do, or you're trying to accomplish, and you've answered all the questions that we're going to go through throughout this, then you sit down to actually write your application, and it's much easier. The point here is that the planning is very important. And so I'm going to go through these different steps and kind of give you some leading questions, things for you to think about as you are planning for your first or your next grant application. So some things to consider for your organization as you are getting grant ready is, are you financially prepared for this? A lot of times, funders want to see that there's a good track record of success with the organization. You can demonstrate these things by having a board-approved annual budget and any financial records from years past. And what they're looking at there is that they're trying to say, okay, so if your organization has $4,000 in revenue each year from membership dues and maybe little raffles that you have, there, and you're only demonstrating through your board approved annual budget or financial records that your organization has the capacity to handle probably no more than $10,000 or $20,000. You need to you'll demonstrate that through your financial preparedness, and then that will help them to gauge whether or not they think that you're actually capable of handling additional funding that they would give to you. It's really important to have these things like a board approved annual budget and those financial records from years past so that you can demonstrate what it is that you are capable of doing. A lot of organizations that come to me, they say things like, well, I don't really have a board approved budget. I just self-fund everything. Well, that's not going to give you a very good foot in the door when a funder wants to see what you've been able to do in the past, because you're not demonstrating that you can actually make money through your organization. Now, if you're new, I don't want that to discourage anybody, because like I said, there are special funders out there who want to support small organizations who are ready to grow, and they just need those skills, and they just sort of need that, first boost. So you can definitely get there, but having these basic fundamental elements like a board approved budget and some sort of financial records is going to be really important for making that first grant application. Now, again, they want to see that you have a thoughtful approach and you've actually put some planning behind the thing that you're asking funds for. So they want to see things like that this thing that you're asking money for is part of a bigger plan or a bigger vision. And maybe that appears through some sort of annual plan for your organization or a strategic plan. Again, one that's been approved by the board. This, again, it just demonstrates that you've got your foundational elements, you know how to run a nonprofit organization in an above board sort of way, and that you're ready to take the next step and do more with your organization. They're really looking for that successful track record, financially, programmatically, and to see that your organization possesses the capacity to complete this. Now, just a couple weeks ago, earlier last month, I guess, I'd gotten a call from someone who was getting ready. Their organization had been around for about 5 years or so, 5 or 7 years, and they had some programmatic successes in their past, and so they had received grant funds anywhere from like $10,000 to $25,000, but they were going for something that was a couple $100,000, and that was a little bit of it could have been a bit of a stretch. These were dollars that came in to the city of Chicago through the American Rescue Plan, and they had demonstrated we've done these things in the past, may have been at a smaller scale, but now we have these great partners in place, and we're trying to take a step and grow and get a little bit bigger. So the strategy that we used was to look at the great work that they had done with the small amount of the smaller capacity that they had, but also demonstrated that the individual who was the president of the organization had this really long history of running like multi-million-dollar federal programs. And so she as an individual understood what it was going to take to grow this nonprofit because of her personal and professional experience. So I say that because I don't, as we're talking about this, I know that I kind of started on this negative note, and I don't like to just stay in negativity. Organizations, nonprofits are made up of people, and people with skills, and people with the ability to do things. And so just think about that. If you're getting a little bit nervous and you're like, oh my gosh, now I don't know how to, our organization has only had, $600 in revenue in the last couple of years. Okay, that might be true, but what have the individuals inside your organization? What can they contribute that might be able to help sort of flesh out this entire picture? I wouldn't go from $600 asking for $50,000 from a grant, but something in between, and to prove your concept and to show that you have this capacity to complete the project, whether it's through the organization or the people that are coming together because of that. Now, thoughtful planning leads to all of these things. Now, earlier, remember I was talking about the frustrations that I think sometimes new grant writers get when they sit down to write an application. If they haven't gone through the actual planning process, then they probably aren't going to be able to just say these things when they sit down to write the application. So again, the thoughtful planning pieces of this leads to a succinct project description, a reasonable budget, a good timeline, a statement of need, a justification for why your organization is the one to do this, your ability to demonstrate that you've thought about what the measurable outcomes, the purpose of your project is. Thoughtful planning also makes a very clear case for who it is that is going to be served by this application or by this grant or this project, these grant funds that are going out there. And it also demonstrates the partnerships that you have across the community. So let's talk about what some of these very specific strategies for preparing a successful grant application might be. So before I do that, I'm going to take a break, and I will, well, I'm going to take a drink. I'm going to ask Tammy, is there anything in the chat that we need to address right away? Or in the question and answer, anything like that, Tammy?
Yes, there was one question, Lindy. It says, with some applications like job applications, the documents go through a computer system and are rejected or accepted before they even get to a human. Does this happen with grant applications?
I have never, that's a good question. My experience is no, I've never been in a situation where an application is just denied before anybody looks at it. And I'm going to say this with a caveat, unless something is not appropriately attached. But typically, if you didn't attach a required document to the grant application, it's not going to let you hit submit. So, and usually, like if, for example, let's say you submitted something and it wasn't the answer was blank, or you put NA when it really was applicable and you should have answered it, it's going to require a person to actually stop and respond to that. So I've never had an entire application like a job application get rejected by a machine. And to be really honest, my experience with the specific like online grant portals that are out there, they don't have that capacity. That's just not how they're designed. Whoops, excuse me. So I think the answer to that is simply no. I've never had any experience like that. Was that it, Tammy, or were there any others for now?
That was the only one for now, Lindy. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. So a project description is always, I've never written a grant application where it didn't ask me to describe what it is that we were trying to do. This can be anywhere from a paragraph to several pages long, depending on the application that you're filling out. There's usually sort of a project summary where they just want, 2 to 3 sentences, maybe a full paragraph. There's probably some sort of limited character or limited words that you can put in this little box that sort of summarizes really clearly what it is that you want to do. Much like an executive summary in other reports or something like that, you might not get to, you might not actually write that until the very end, once you've clearly thought through all these other things. So normally when I start a project description, I just do like bullet points and tips from the trade here. If you're able to, and I think most of the time they're set up in such a way that you can do this, where you can access the questions first, the very specific questions that an application is asking for. You can access those first and sort of copy and paste those into Word or Google Docs or whatever word processing software you prefer to use, and answer them there, and then copy and paste your final drafts into the grant portal. That's just always a better way to do it. Now, every now and then I'll run across some sort of sponsorship application or grant application where You just have to get on there and there's one page and it's live and you can't save it or anything like that. And those are the worst. But you can at least get in there, look at all of those, try to copy and paste, take a couple days or however long you need, and complete that in a different thing and copy and paste them later. So I just wanted to say that because that's really important. Now, I also, as we're getting ready to go through these elements that make a strong grant application, I want to make it very clear that you always need to answer the specific questions that are in your application. What we're going to go over tend to be, just from my experience of writing hundreds of grants, reviewing even more, successful grants too, that these are the kinds of things that that funders are asking for. These are the kinds of things that you're going to see in a grant application. So they might be worded a little bit differently, but the concepts that we're going to cover are basically the same here. And the things that I've asked you to think about are going to be relevant for just about any application you were to sit down and prepare for. So the project description, in whatever way they ask it, it might be something like, please describe your project. I mean, it might be something that simple. Or it might be, please describe your project and make sure you include information about these following things. And then there's bullet points that they want you to address. Whatever those are, again, the project description is really a clear statement that tells the reader, tells the scorer, the committee that's reviewing your application, what your project is all about. What's the big idea? What is this thing that we're trying to do? Why this thing that you're trying to do is important. Usually in the project description, especially in the project summary, it's going to say, where and when the event takes place, or whether it's an event or a project or program, where and when it is happening, who it serves, and what specifically you're planning to use the grant funds for. I always try to put that sentence in my project description, even if it's just a quick summary. Through this project, I'll use the one that I started with. Through this project, we're requesting $5,000 to fund new musical instruments for our junior high students at Lapel Junior High. And so, that kind of says who it serves, the junior high students that are in band at Lapel High School, and we're going to use $5,000 to buy new musical equipment. So it's a succinct statement about what it is that you're trying to do. Again, that was just one sentence, so that's not like that does not make an entire project description, but just an example of something, a very clear statement of what it is that you're trying to do. In a project description, I don't start out with this like over the top sort of like flowery language. That's really annoying. Again, you just remember that there are people who are reading dozens or hundreds of other applications, and they just want to understand what the project is about. Now the budget. This is, I could do a whole day long presentation just about budgets, but this is one of the, next to like the project description and your ability to say what it is that you're trying to do and why. The budget is probably the second most important, or maybe even the most important, or co-important elements of a grant application, because it clearly lists what it is that you need money for. And it's very important that you make sure when you're sitting down to write your grant application that the thing that you're asking money for is an eligible expense or an eligible cost. All of those things are going to be laid out in the grant guidelines. So for example, I had an organization come to me and they said, hey, we really want to pave our parking lot, our driveway and our parking lot into our community building. Right now it's gravel. We found this funder and we want to ask for $12,000 to pave this. And so I went online and I went over to the funder and I checked out the grant guidelines. Well, they don't fund capital projects like that. They only want to fund organizational capacity building or like a very specific type of programming. And there was nothing in their grant guidelines that it was not a priority for them to do capital projects like paving a driveway or a parking lot. Now, that might be your need with your organization, but that is not the funder's priority. So putting that application together was just not going to, it was just going to be a waste of everybody's time. So that's just really important. And a lot of the times when I review applications, I'm going, I feel like they didn't even look at the eligible costs, because everything that they're asking for is not within our funding parameters. So always when you're getting ready to start an application, now you might have a need, and maybe this need cuts across several different things, and that's okay. But when you go into the funder, make sure that you're just asking that funder for a specific amount of money for something that they know that they will fund. You also want to be really specific about the items in your budget, at least know what those are. So you may not always have the opportunity to itemize every little thing that you're going to need to buy. But you, as the grant preparer, do need to know all of those little things that you're going to need to buy. And you want to make sure that you have those listed somewhere. So oftentimes, like I'm working on a project right now where we have 3 different funding sources for the same project. Each funder is willing to pay, like their eligible costs are something different. They're a different piece of the project. So I have like 3 or 4 different budgets. I have sort of an overall budget that says, here's everything that we need. And then it's sort of broken out by, here's how we're asking from this funder, this is how we're asking from this funder, and this is what we're asking for this funder, because they all want to fund different things. And so sometimes you have to do that. And you need to know specifically what each of those pieces are, and just be very familiar with that. I'm always going to encourage you to use the funder's budget form. Oftentimes, if you use one that is not the form that the funder wants you to use, they're just going to kick it out. And again, it's really frustrating because those reviewers who are reviewing all of those applications, they want to be able to compare apples to apples. And so they don't want a different kind of budget coming in that doesn't make any sense for what they're asking. And another thing is that they oftentimes are going to ask you, okay, if we can only fund this portion of your project, how are you getting the rest of it funded? And so they're going to have a specific way that they want to ask that. Now you'll see on here, so we're talking about the budget, but we also have on the bottom here, the budget narrative. About half of the applications, maybe a little bit more, maybe closer to like 3 out of 4 applications that I work on will ask for a budget narrative as well. And what a budget narrative is really an opportunity for you to kind of describe how you arrived at the numbers in your budget, which is usually some sort of spreadsheet looking thing, and more details about it. So this is where you would say, okay, hey, we're asking $500 from you for this, and here's how we arrived at this $500, because we know these are the items that we're going to need to purchase. But we're also asking for $2,000 from this other organization for this part of the cost. And so the budget narrative gives you an opportunity to say, this is how I arrived at these numbers, and here's how I'm going to pay for the other pieces of this, or whatever that might be. And there's usually specific questions in there that we'll ask you to answer related to that. And oh my gosh, we're already at a quarter after, so I'm going to try to speed up through this. Now, I do want to say that I think all of my contact information is available on the conference website, and you may see it here at the end as well. And so always feel free to reach out to me by email or my phone, and we can talk about any specific questions or get help, especially if it's something you're trying to do through this community organization. So the timeline is really important too, because it demonstrates that you're going to be able to accomplish the project in the time frame that you've said you can. It shows that you have really thought through the process of this whole project, and it details the major milestones that you're going to have to hit to know that you did the thing right, and the responsibilities of each person who's involved with it. One thing that you want to check in your guidelines is that the grant, the period of the grant funder also aligns with your project. So, something, if your project is going to happen in 2024, but the funder only wants to, do projects in 2025, that's not going to work for you. So, and pay attention, especially to like the dates of the months and the day of the month. So like, some projects might go January 1 to December 31, and your project needs to go from July to June, and they just don't align up. And so you need to just pay attention to those things. Things that you might consider as you're thinking about a timeline for a project are the time that you might need to plan specific things, to recruit your helpers, the people that you're going to serve, your marketing and outreach. How are you going to get the word out about this? And also consider other similar events or programs or projects that might be happening around that same time. Is there a way to create synergy between the things that you're doing, or is it going to conflict, for example? Like one year I was working at the Cherokee Heritage Center, and we planned our big gala event the same weekend accidentally that NSU did their Emerald Ball. And so we were going to be fighting over the same people. So those are the kinds of mistakes you just want to be thinking about with the timeline. Now, a statement of need can be really important when you're putting together your application. And in terms of the planning process, what I want you to think about as you're getting ready, you're getting your organization to be grant ready, is what is it about this project or program, this thing that we're doing, this big idea? Why is this needed? Why is this so important to our community, to the people that we serve, to our mission? This is another way to think about it might be, what happens if this project doesn't happen? What happens if we don't do this thing? If we don't get the funding to establish a food bank, we know that 37 families in Terracita are not going to meet their nutritional needs. And, so you might be able to think about it that way. What is it about this thing that we're doing that that demonstrates the need for the project or the program or whatever it is that you're working on? It doesn't always have to be community oriented. It might actually scratch that, pretend I didn't say that. All the things that you're doing probably are community oriented. Something else to consider is this part of a larger plan? Now, this sort of goes back to what I said earlier about making sure that you have, as part of grant readiness from your organizational standpoint, is that you have a board approved annual plan or 5-10-year strategic plan. If you have the opportunity to say, hey, we need to do this project because we said this was step 3 in the 5-step process of addressing this overall problem in the community, you can point to that. So anytime that you can give legitimacy to the thing that you're trying to demonstrate, it's good. Any data that you have to back up your claim is also very helpful. Give yourself plenty of time to get this information, especially if you're like dealing with some sort of like census data or something like that. Another important element that I think organizations often don't really think about is why your organization, why is your organization the best one, or how is it particularly situated to address this particular need? If you're a food bank, you might, you're not going to be able to say we're like, we want this ballet camp for students. Like those things aren't necessarily aligned. But if your organization has been tackling nutritional deficiencies in the community for a really long time, this is how you can state that. So be thinking about these things as you're preparing your application. What is it about our organization that sets us apart and prepares us to be the appropriate organization to do this work? This is your chance to brag about you. This is not the time to be humble. This is when you really have to go to the funder and say, this is why you need to give us money and not the other guys. Anytime that you can demonstrate that you have a track record with similar projects or maybe the same project year after year, especially if you can state the numbers that were served through the project before, that's really helpful too. And again, it establishes your organization as unique, and also having a really strong track record. So it kind of goes back to that grant readiness piece as well. Now, something that I love, this is one of the things that I get so excited about. And organizations can really set themselves apart if they have good measurable outcomes as part of their plan, and as part of their project design. Your outcomes are related to the purpose for your project. So why is it that we're trying to do this thing? Like what makes this important? And how can we measure whether we actually accomplish the thing we set out to do? It's important here when this can be very difficult. I understand why it's so difficult for leaders to capture this. But some things that you can think about here are, are we trying to capture qualitative data, like stories or experiences, or are we trying to capture numbers? Like, hopefully you're trying to do both, but if the funder has specific requirements for one or the other, you want to make sure that you're sort of tailoring that in to your application as well. And you also want to think creatively about how it is you're going to capture this. And this is highly dependent on the project or program, or the thing that you're trying to accomplish. But some things that you might consider if you are, working through one now is like capturing the data through surveys of people who participated, doing focus groups or interviews, or if you're trying to teach something, maybe do like a pre and post questionnaire. And I just realized that that's super misspelled, so I do apologize for that. So do a pre or post questionnaire to kind of measure where they were when they started the program and where they ended up at the end. So those are some things to consider there. Now, it's very important and that you are able to articulate who it is that is going to benefit from this thing that you're doing. Oftentimes, applications will ask you to say, how many people will this serve? They want it broken down sort of by demographics, and you may have to estimate those things. Don't even try to overestimate or inflate your numbers, because as grant reviewers, we can see right through that. If I think about this, if I were to say, if I was having a conversation with you and I saw this number that was clearly inflated, and I said, how did you arrive at this number? And you were going to have to blah, 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 fumble through the answer, then don't put that number down. Instead, I want you to think back to the track record of a similar project, and be very specific about how it was you might have arrived at that number. The more specific you can get, the better. Knowing how you're going to engage them or identify them, the people that you want to serve, that's really important too. So like that's the sort of marketing and outreach piece. How are you going to get there? Again, estimate those beneficiaries reasonably and with as much sort of data as you have to justify how you arrived at that number. And then you also want to be able to explain how it is that they benefited from this thing that you're doing. Again, this relates to the measurable outcomes that we just talked about, as well as the project need. So you want to think about, some of these things sort of triangulate with each other. So who are we trying to serve? Like, what's the thing we're trying to do? How are we measuring whether we did it or not? And what are some of those outcomes? Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about before we open it up for Q&A in the last couple of minutes here is partnerships. Your community partnerships. If you're able to demonstrate strong support from the community, from the people that you intend to serve, from stakeholders in the community, folks that say, yes, we really need this, the more that you can demonstrate that, the stronger your application is going to be. Now, this is, again, because we're talking about grant planning that prepares you for the grant writing piece of this. This is something that you're going to want to do like months or weeks in advance. Because this has happened to me before, as somebody comes to me and says, hey, I need a letter of support tomorrow. And I try to be helpful because I've been in their shoes too. Sometimes things just happen and you need that letter of support. But if you are coming to me and you're running some sort of, demonstration of commitment or partnership, I'm going to want to have thought through that pretty specifically. Like, how are we partnering? What are the responsibilities that we might have in this? What are the expectations of each partner? Now that, there's sort of a difference there between a partnership and a letter of support, where I might say, yes, the work that they're doing over there is great, we support it, but you still want to do that from an organization that is going to have some sort of background with what it is that you're doing. So establish those partnerships early, and request the letters of support or commitment as applicable or as they're required as early as you can in the grant application process, because that will be really important for moving forward. So with that, I am going to take a drink, and I'm going to, oh, we got something else here in the question and answer, which I see now. So our anonymous attendee has asked, thoughtful planning. Can you explain a realistic timeline and the bullet points after that? I sure can. Let me go back there if I can make my computer do this. A realistic timeline. So maybe it was, okay, a realistic timeline. What I'm really trying to, oh, I guess I can put this down here, excuse me. When we're talking about timelines here, the important thing is, first of all, that you understand, that you've demonstrated that you've read through the grant guidelines. So remember, I was talking about aligning your project or the thing you're asking funding for within the funders guidelines. So if your project is between June and October of the year, and they say your projects must be completed between January 1st and December, you're good to go. But if they only do January to June and you're trying to start in June and end in October, that might not work. So just, first of all, there's sort of the mechanics of making sure that your project fits within that timeline. So the other thing about a thoughtful timeline would be, like, can you actually accomplish all these things in the period that you said you could? I don't want to just go to like bad examples, because I have certainly seen those where they say, oh, in the matter of 9 months, we're going to put together a $2 million temporary museum exhibit that's going to be up for 2 years or something like that. And you're like, that just doesn't make any sense. What you really want to be able to demonstrate is that the outcomes, those pieces, those things that you're trying to accomplish through your project are reasonable, that you can accomplish them with the capacity that you have, and that you've thought about all of the steps that are going to be required to get to the end, to the thing that you're trying to do. I can't really answer that question with any more specificity without knowing exactly like what project you have in mind. If you want to come on, I don't know how much, we have 2 minutes left and nothing else in the Q&A. So I don't know, Tammy, if we're able to bring that person on, and if they want to ask some more specifically something that I might be able to help them with, I'd be happy to do that if we have the capacity to do that. But again, I think the important thing here is that you've thought about those milestones, those major things that need to happen in order for you to achieve your outcome. And you're making sure that you have enough people, that you'll be able to find all the money that you need to do the thing, that you've secured the appropriate resources, or that you at least, so like if you're doing something that requires you to, find a venue, that you're able to do that in an appropriate amount of time. That, maybe if you're trying to, for example, serve students, public school K through 12 students with something during the summertime, that actually happens during the summertime and not while they're in school, for example. So just, those sorts of things are what I was talking about there. So I hope that's helpful. And again, like sort of planning, how much time are we going to need to plan? How much time are we going to need to reach out to folks and recruit enough people that we said we're going to in the project description, for example. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at there. With that, I'm going to stop share. I think I've stopped the share. And Tammy asked if there's anything else that we need to cover or if that was good.
Thank you, Lindy. Does anyone have any more questions for Lindy? Put them in the Q&A if you do. And if we can't get back to you while we're online, she will certainly reply to your emails. Lindy, what a wonderful session on grant writing. I really enjoyed that very much.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to, oh my gosh, we have like 29 attendees. That's awesome. I wasn't able to see that while we were going, so I kind of just felt like I was talking to a void, but I hope it was helpful for everybody. Excuse me, please reach out as you need, and best of luck with your next grant application.
Lindy, there was another quick question, if we could grab it. Verification for in-kind support. Thank you so much. This was a wealth of information.
So this is a great question. Tammy, am I allowed to go over by just a couple of minutes?
Yes.
Okay. So the verification for in-kind support, what they're talking about there, and yes, I can put, if I put something in the chat, everybody will see it, right?
Yes.
I'm going to put that in there, collaboration.com. This is my email. So go ahead and it's in the chat. You can feel free to write that down or copy and paste it into a note or whatever while I answer this question. So in-kind support, this is a question related to the budget. So you can get in-kind support. That would be like somebody donating goods or services to your organization instead of giving you cash for it. So like, let's say, you know, there's a community venue out there that says, yes, we want you to be able to hold your after school reading program at our facility. We would normally charge, you know, $50 for 3 hours of renting our space, but we're gonna in-kind donate that to you instead. So that normally, and that's a really good example, I think, to demonstrate this. So what you would do to demonstrate that in-kind donation might be to ask the library director, hey, can you write a letter that says, you know, normally we would charge, you know, $50 to rent, you know, the Delaware room for 3 hours, but we're going to donate that to such and such reading program. And so you could just verify it that way. Now, there are other situations in which, let's say you're using what maybe we're calling like sweat equity. I know that like CCO actually has that as part of the one of their match requirements for some grant funds. So I think you can get, you know, like $7,500 or something like that for your community building, but you have to match it with $7,500 in donated time to your community building. And if you're doing it that way, different funders will require different things, but one way you might be able to do that is just by keeping a very good record of volunteer hours that people have. There are some situations in which the funder will actually say, regardless of whether you are having, you know, unskilled labor or an attorney donate goods and services, it's $15 an hour or whatever. And so you have to follow those guidelines. But generally, if you're looking for an in-kind verification, you would just go to the source of whoever provided the in-kind donation and ask for a letter, or like I said, if it was sweat equity or some sort of like volunteer hours that were translating to a dollar amount, you would want to do that by keeping really good records of the volunteers in your organization. So I hope, Emily, that was helpful to you. I think it was Emily who asked that question.
All right, Lindy. The last one was just asking you to share your information, which you've already done on our chat. And Lindy, we appreciate you so much. We look forward to seeing your next session, Community Needs Assessment, and that will be at 5 o'clock today.
Yes, and for anybody who's interested, we're going to go over some more of those sort of like planning elements that we went over today to help you think about how to get your organization grant ready. So if you like that part, be sure to tune into that one later on.
All right. Thank you so much, Lindy. And we'll see everyone in the next session. Leanne McGee will be doing a session for creating strength-based communities. So please join us. It's good to see everyone.
No.